the 2nd of July, 2022. Thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel, like my official YouTube videos, and go to my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com. So, I went to one Renaissance fair. One. And I only needed one to actually know what was and was not acceptable. And let me give you this as a precursor. I had my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 when I was in basic training. And I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain that took 8.5 years in total to fully dissipate out of the view of the MRI and CAT scans. So these people that I met in the year of 2004, maybe 2005, had been involved in the San Antonio pagan community. Then some people that I knew in the area, which I was already separated for the first time from my now dead ex-husband, I had been invited to a Renaissance fair. I didn't know what one was. I hadn't ever heard of it before, and so I thought of medieval times. Oh, so it's like that. Okay, what's the worst that could happen? Well, I learned not to ask that after that. That it took me one time. So in comparison to people thinking that going and looking at something one time or going to one event that automatically associates with, no. But the irony of the reverse for me as to situations. So I can take other situations where it might take more than one time, but certain times there have been certain problems that were right off the bat, and it was just, I'm gonna go elsewhere because I'm not willing to be a part of certain things. And so while in comparison to how I don't actually go to stir up needless problems the way other people have, and I shouldn't ever deal with anything regarding if other people stir up needless problems, that should not ever be held against me, ever. That should be held against those people who stir up needless problems in comparison, because that's common sense. That's if you have intelligence, of course. So I was invited to this Excalibur fair in Bastrop County in Smithville, Texas. I hadn't ever known what one was. I ordered it was a dark blue with black corset that was a square neck, had an empire collar like that, and it had a big poofy skirt that I put crinoline under. And my son and my daughter didn't attend because I wouldn't bring my son and my daughter to that. Especially if I haven't been to one before, I'm very protective of my son and my daughter, despite what some people might think, because of their stereotyping bigotry, in my opinion. And so I went out there, and so it was with Dawn, I don't know her last name now, John and Jackie, who were related. Dawn and Jackie worked at Chase Bank off of I-90 410 area. So that was as it was. And so I went, and because of what my whole attire was for my outfit, they had an issue because of what my attire was. And they had said that because I was dressed as nobility, that they couldn't be seen in any area. And anywhere where I was, which didn't make any sense after it had been known, first and foremost. So I was only awake from my coma maybe 4 years or 5 years. And so go out to this area. Subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain was still very much visible in the MRI and CAT scans. And their group, I still don't even understand. I didn't make any attempts to understand because I didn't go back. And so after walking around, I found a pair of fairy wings that I liked, and then I got surrounded by 5 males who jumped out of trees, dressed as trolls with weapons in their hands. And after I put my fists up and I was like, all right, if you want to do this, I don't think you're smart. And so they dropped their weapons at my feet, and then it went the way it did, and so on and so forth. It was stupid. They went and complained to who I was informed was a sheriff. And the sheriff, who was shorter than me, and I'm 5'4", so he was maybe 5'2", and he, as well as what I was informed was law enforcement which they didn't specify it was law enforcement for the Renaissance Fair. They said he was a sheriff. Well, okay, so I had a head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. I went from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to 2nd grade math. Just envision a child going to one of those. And so a child being informed that a sheriff, as to those factors, the false charges that I was fully exonerated from because they were false charges to begin with, nonetheless, children. Just think of elementary school age children being taken around those areas with people running around in that capacity, being informed that there's law enforcement utilizing the actual terminology that is known in the actual areas of society, and then these particular situations. Why would any child or children that grow up going to those fairs and or being a part of them, so if they assist setting up those fairs or whatever. I had one experience, and I have prior official YouTube videos of mine. Subscribe to my official YouTube channel, like my official YouTube videos. I've written about it in my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, which is the same as on my website as www.susaneeling.com to www.ladydorybell.com. And I've written about it in my first book, Finding a Silver Lining, which you can find the link in my book section on my website, Finding the Silver Lining, as well as I think in the modern day book, as far as that's concerned. So these people had my biological mother was a part of SCA and TRF, which I don't understand, haven't been to, don't have any need to, actually thought that was normal. She's a biological adult, obviously, because I was a biological adult, and that's my biological mother. She actually defended this. Think about the mental health disorders that have been going on. If they start from the time frame when Renaissance fairs began, hypothetically, you found the version of where it all started regarding the mental health disorders throughout the United States of America. Because why would anybody ever think in regards to children being capable to actually distinguish? You have the obvious factors regarding pop culture and video games and computer games. It is common sense. I didn't ever take my son or my daughter to one of those things. I wouldn't ever take my son or my daughter to one of those things, just from that one experience. And so I met a few people, not just after at the San Antonio pagan community areas and BDSM communities, but also in IHOP, and there were people who tried to convince me otherwise, and I refused to change my mind. No matter what, even when in the year of 2019 or 2020, I was contacted, asked if I wanted to go to one of those. No, I don't ever want to go to one of those again. When I was in Washington State, a female who ran some Renaissance Fair stuff in Oregon and Washington State let me know that she took her children to that. So I informed her of what I dealt with. I don't know how anybody could ever think, so whatever the generational number is, what is the generational amount of mental health disorders to take in consideration? Because that Renaissance Fair garbage, you're literally telling children that these people are sheriffs or law enforcement. They don't know any better. They look similar or whatever in the capacity of, and then what, in real life, they see a real law enforcement officer? Common sense. You don't have to have a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of your brain to put that together. I mean, seriously. And so while I personally haven't ever taken my son or my daughter to one, as I wouldn't, I have taken them to historical reenactments, which is something I grew up with in New Jersey. I was capable to distinguish the difference between a historical reenactment compared to a Renaissance fair. I explained the difference to my son and my daughter so that way they understood what the references were as I went over the historical factors, which is a different situation fully in comparison. And yes, while the situations as to a Renaissance fair, well, instead of ever taking them to one of those, I only allowed them to go to a medieval times one time, which is obviously different in comparison to a Renaissance fair. And so these particular needless problems that stirred up after going to one Renaissance fair, not just at that Renaissance fair, but thereafter, it was the dumbest amount of just everything. It was ridiculous, in my opinion. Furries are just, and for those in the supposed to be consenting adult lifestyle, furries are just the equivalent of those Renaissance fair types, in my opinion. Anybody who's been involved in most specifically the BDSM aspect, you know how many issues people have with furries. And the reason why, in my opinion, is if you take a psychological evaluation of people who are willing to be furries, they haven't accepted themselves for who they are. And they want to try to hide, literally, because they hide inside of the costume, in comparison to just accepting themselves for who they are. Well, in my opinion, all they do is ever judge people, which who are they to judge? Because ye without sin cast the first stone. And so I guess I can make a joke. I cast a stone in regards of, after how my son and I wound up in Washington State, after what occurred to my daughter regarding McCoy Elementary School and Carrollton, Texas, of Carrollton Farmers Branch Independent School District. I had told people about the needless problems, and a bunch of these people, so I could tell the difference. So the way those people responded, there were ones who were like, well, don't you think that, no, I don't care. I don't care. So I believe that if you're going to have Renaissance fairs because of the way the alcohol is, automatically because of, yeah, sure, it's not a 50% higher or whatever the aspects of, but you have children being in a vicinity where they have literally been informed that it's law enforcement, but it's not real law enforcement, and they're children. Again, I reiterate, I don't know what the mental health disorder uptick was, but if it just so happens to be that the mental health disorder uptick had been from the time frame of Renaissance fairs popping up, I wouldn't be surprised at all. So at that point, it's one of those, well, the obvious common sense would be 18 years and older. Why would you ever take children to a Renaissance fair? At all. There's medieval times, and while some people might try to say whatever they might wish, yeah, oh, okay. Not when you have people that you literally call law enforcement names. I thought it was illegal to impersonate a law enforcement officer. They literally call it a sheriff. That's what they called it at the Renaissance Fair, Excalibur Fair, in the year 2005. Nobody has been capable over the years, and this includes in Club Sapphire. So Nina had informed me that she had been running whatever, as far as I told her what happened. She tried to claim that it was something different, and in her Renaissance Fair it was whatever, and she tried to get me to go to one. No! No means no. Period and end of story. I don't care what theme you have. I don't care what you think. And see, then there's the other problem when you take in consideration that they're all around this whatever area, and then they can't distinguish because they're adults biologically. So they have so for those in law enforcement, real law enforcement who haven't been to one, they have actual pop-up tents, which is a modern looking object, obviously. They cover it with certain types of fabric, but it's still a known pop-up tent. They utilize technology for payments. And then they have current time frame tables. They know whatever they sell has been made wherever it was made. And so they have all of this modernized stuff, but they want to claim it's a Renaissance fair. Then they have all of these other factors, and yet all of the stuff that they utilize and or have in that partaking portion is still in the general area of the overall general public. They have electricity, obviously, to run their credit card machines, and yet they want to claim the Renaissance fair of whatever. They have to have certain food requirements as to cooking standards, and yet they want to claim the Renaissance fair as far as whatever excuses, in my opinion. And so those types of mental health disorders, if they specifically really started kicking up whenever that became a larger factor, they literally immerse themselves with the combination of the time frame regarding the Renaissance and medieval eras of time. And then they utilize the current technology as to whatever point in time to then have people pretend to be law enforcement, as far as that's concerned, while selling alcoholic beverages, and children are running around. Then they tell these children that those sheriffs are law enforcement, even though they're not law enforcement in reality. Again, I don't understand. I thought it was a law that it's illegal to impersonate a law enforcement officer. However, that's what they do. Then they drum up false charges, don't see any problem, then they have a public square, and then they wonder why. People in the general public are like, you do what? And so those types, think about that, if anybody knows furries in the supposed to be consenting adult lifestyle. Think about that, if there's the culmination of. Just accept yourself for who you are. Nonetheless, as far as that's concerned, I had dealt with, from the time frame of 2005, after I stood my ground, defended myself, I warned people throughout San Antonio because of the 5 military bases. Some of these people actually joined the military. As far as whichever, I know of one specifically who had joined the Army. Dawn herself had once been in the Navy. So, there's a bit of a few issues to take in consideration, in my opinion. And so it seems common sense that you wouldn't allow a child, especially a minor aged child. I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. I went from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to 2nd grade math, and I was extremely confused. So take a child that's an actual biological child And can you see what type of problems would automatically come from that sort of garbage, in my opinion? What if you raise a child in that sort of environment? I dealt with what I dealt with in Carrollton, Texas, and yet they didn't see anything wrong in regards to that Renaissance Fair garbage. I don't know how, though. Common sense. And so those particular situations, and so then you have how I wound up in Washington State with my son after what occurred regarding McCoy Elementary School, the Fort Worth Zoo. My daughter had told the doctor and I in Austin State Hospital in the year 2012 that she had a gorilla that was talking to her, which sounds like a furry, at the Fort Worth Zoo. Which, that's a problem, obviously. I was told by a scuba diver I had once dated that he had dressed up as a Sasquatch, which I don't know what a Sasquatch is, and that would be Sean Leonard as a reference. And so again, in regards to prior official YouTube videos of mine, there's one person to ask about my scuba diving, that's me. So if in reference to individuals that couldn't distinguish between a real scuba diver mask compared to what my son and my daughter had to go to the beach and actually had pictures in regards of the beach, and they have anything to do with Renaissance Fair stuff, think about the mental state as far as that's concerned. Think about what it takes in regards of common sense. Think about what would the actualities be to genuine intelligence. Think about that, and then think about they go in the water. They go descend into the water, and some locations are reservoirs that they go scuba diving in. But I got made fun of because I earned 26 scuba diving certifications as an unattached female, in comparison to the respect that obviously was earned. And then on top of which, remember my childhood going out to the oceanic waters, so what level of intelligence would those types of people be to ever actually speak with in truth? Because if they can't distinguish the difference, such as a picture from Halloween, where I actually wore the outfit that I had, including my fairy wings. And I had the refrigerator behind me, as well as a chalkboard as far as the mail area for keys as well. That's a whole other situation regarding during the first separation. Nonetheless, that particular area, as far as that's concerned, you can obviously tell from the background, that's not photoshopped, by the way, that is the actual kitchen from what was my house in San Antonio. And so in that reference, if you can't tell the difference between the Excalibur Fair area compared to a kitchen, because of any of those aspects, such as a refrigerator that would need to be there for the reference to whatever food, that proves my point specifically as to why children that are minor age, in my opinion, should not be allowed at Renaissance fairs. I didn't ever allow my son or my daughter at one, for clarification. I didn't ever take them to one. My biological mother was actually jealous that she didn't get to go. You could go drive yourself. That's not my job to drive you. Grow up. You're older than me. Seriously, take that in consideration. Then in those particular references, what needless problems as to needless drama? So how many problems in regards of real law enforcement have there been since the time frame of Renaissance fairs? or whatever they call them. If there has been a literal uptick, and then the mental health situations have all been, and then take in consideration those people who do rioting in comparison to peaceful protests, what number of them have been to a minimum of 3 of their own free will? Which is obviously different in comparison. I've only been to 1, and that was enough for me. I didn't see any reason to go to another one. So keep in mind that 2005, that Excalibur Fair problem. Later in 2005, at IHOP on Bandera and 410, I meet 2 males where one of them, the green hair one, had known people who were a part of that Excalibur Fair while being active duty in the Army. His friend he had said that he was stationed in South Korea and he was back in San Antonio during the time frame. Then there's that. 2008 is an overall factor regarding everything. I was making attempts to take care of as best as I could. And so handled the situation regarding the Bronze Star, which that is as it is as far as BAMC's concerned. And then in comparison to anybody thinking about that reality, no, I had to deal with all that other stuff. Then you have McCoy Elementary School and all of those problems, while my ex-in-laws being that way, the only person who took my side was Grandpa Nichols. And there is that. And so get into scuba diving, make attempts to explain, and a few people use a few words in regard to that Renaissance Fair crap while I'm in the middle of earning my scuba diving certifications. I think I was at my 12th or 13th scuba diving certification class. So that's 2009, so 2005 to 2009. And then, in regards of what's supposed to be considered the adult consenting lifestyle, I went to one event in 2009. That individual that had the aspects as to how I wound up on stage, again, I did not volunteer for that. I did not want to be a part of that needless set of problems. The situations regarding the go-go dancers was, yeah, no, I'll stay over here. I'm not okay with that. And I don't like that. I mean, you could, whatever, I don't have any, no thank you. And so then you take in consideration, and then 2013, my son and I wind up in Washington State, and those particular factors, 2016, I think, is when Nina started working there and brought up the whatever Renaissance Fair as far as Washington State and Oregon State. And then 2019 or 2020, and an individual contacts me and or whichever way, and then the Renaissance Fair crap. No, I'm not interested in ever attending another one ever, whatsoever. There is nothing about Renaissance fairs that is acceptable to me at all. I did not have any comfort at all. I did not see any reason for anything that had occurred. And so when I actually told the supposed law enforcement whatever at that Excalibur fair, in comparison to the false charges, well, then it was, well, what about pictures? No. How about you do your job? It wasn't until later that I found out he wasn't a real sheriff. Think about children, minor-aged children, attending that and being informed that later. I am a biological adult. I was a biological adult then. I have no need, no want, no desire, and no preference to ever attend one of those again because of what occurred. There is no undoing that at all. So while some people have thought whatever they've thought as far as them thinking it's just a joke, it's not a joke. That's my life that was fucked with. That's my son, my daughter, and I as our family that was fucked with because of those types in any capacity not being capable to distinguish the difference. That doesn't change that fact. They may have thought it was a joke. It's not a joke. It's the truth. And obviously the facts. So my opinion is that there should be an age restriction. No one under the age of 18 years old. Scuba diving has a minimum age in regards of, which I personally think that it should be raised even in regards to the junior SEALs as far as certain situations. However, especially, are there even background checks on instructors regarding scuba diving in the civilian recreational area? Has that even been thought of before? Because I would think that it would be common sense. You're allowing people to go into areas which can be considered as reservoirs, where the general public, you've got my journal blog updates in regards of my website, www.susanmeling.com, the ornery PSA area, which is in the same as www.ladydorybell.com. So those particular types that haven't been, and then just think, I saw children that were running around those Renaissance fairs with the equivalent to Game Boys. Take that in consideration in reference to the mental health disorder. Hello, good morning. And so what needless problems would there possibly be? Maybe law enforcement, whichever branch, whichever division, whether local, precinct, state, or federal, could possibly, hypothetically, they could see a few issues. Maybe they'd have a few reports and those particular factors. So obviously then you have the situations of social media and different pictures depending on and all those particular combinations. Well, then there's that to review. So, but obviously with, however, Renaissance fairs in comparison to modeling is something to think about, in my opinion. So, there's that. So I can say that a lot of problems occurred pretty immediately, needlessly, after attending one Renaissance fair, just one. Didn't even know what it was. And in my defense, I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain still. I was awake from my coma, from my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 when I was in basic training. And then they had the fake law enforcement, and again, I reiterate, I thought that was illegal. So, then there's my scuba diving work as too. And those types of those needless problems. The amount of wasted time. There is a difference between actual religion and spirituality compared to those types in that Renaissance fair crap. Huge difference. Probably should educate yourself in comparison to claiming you know anything at all. Such as during that homeowners aspect of a housewarming party in what was my home. The Catholic neighbors nearby, please don't even pretend when it comes to certain things as to those particular factors. I grew up where I grew up. I was an ordained reverend by that point in time. If those people had anything to do with what was going on in McCoy Elementary, and or then the needless problems regarding McHenry County as far as government center, as to my biological mother and her being excited because it was in Woodstock, Illinois. I don't know why that would be important, but then she was so excited because my biological little sister could go to McHenry High School at that time. Again, my biological mother liked TRF and SCA. I grew up, so did my biological little sister, grew up going and having historical reenactments which were informed as to the formation of the original 13 colonies. Old Tenet Presbyterian Church, as far as those particular factors, and when in reference to the nativity scene, we knew. We were old enough. We had to be teenagers in that reference, after a certain point, as far as the other situation regarding, baby Jesus. But nonetheless, common sense. Huge, 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 huge amount of just obviousness in reference to all of the differences. So, those types, in comparison, don't pretend that's not bigotry in reference to those neighbors. Just constant bitching when it came to certain things. Which that is the time, because, it was the time anyway. So yeah, that type had just bitched about everything. Bitched about my 2 Great Danes. Bitched about my fence line. Bitched about how I kept my garden. Bitched about the interior of my house. Bitched that I had a second story. Bitched and bitched and bitched. The exact type of female my biological father had warned me about that was just a dumb girl that complained about every stupid little thing. My opinion. As far as that's concerned, which my biological father knows whatever he and Anna, as far as when I had to move because of everything else. So if those people, as far as that garbage, those types, that was my family in comparison. You didn't do anything but the Southern Democrat types. And yes, I had the nerve to fly my American flag with the New Jersey flag and the Texas flag on my house underneath. the American flag. Not flagpoles in the ground at the equal level regarding on my house. Learn, educate yourself correctly. Don't cherry pick. You know, that would be ignorant. Make sure to have intelligence instead, because that would be common sense. Today is the 2nd of July, 2022. Thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. And so yes, after 22 years of being awake from my coma, and after 2008, as to the length of time of the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain to now in 2022. And yes, after 22 years of dealing with headaches and migraines, with those combined factors as to having given birth to my son, 7 days of labor in the hospital, and give birth to my daughter, 7 days of labor in the hospital, 1 and 2 years, as far as that's concerned, you know what? Yeah, that medical retirement because of, I know, chronic pain. You learn to do things if you have the will to. If not, those types that don't think about that, that's their issues. So then, in reference to memory deficits and cognitive disorders, and having went from what was my college algebra with trigonometry and calculus, which all AP, to what was considered a second grade. Yeah, compared to Texas. Oh yeah, no, of course I'm gonna come across as more intelligent. Education standards are obviously different. College standards are obviously different. Some people actually know that. So, in that hypothetical as to what I dealt with from 2009 through 2012, common sense. So, today is the 2nd of July, 2022. Not the year 2000. This is 2022. Good morning. Wake up. So the 2nd of July, 2022, I did a lot to work on myself for betterment, so that way I could, and where I could assist others, as far as other factors, privately without being or dealing with certain factors, privacy rights, so important. Comparison to those types who would be bigoted and invasive and would think that they'd have a right when they don't, as far as those particular factors, especially those Renaissance fair types. And any connection to what's supposed to be considered the adult consenting lifestyle, well, then those male dominants that have a problem with a female dominant, and I just earned 26 scuba diving certifications on my own. Yeah, okay, I've been involved with the lifestyle, and I explained where I was born and raised, so words. And so just because I am who I am, I don't actually have to be involved with what's considered BDSM. That's not even a turn on for me anyway, at all. There's nothing about that actually does anything for me in that capacity, at all. Though in the swinging community, a female is the dominant at all times. Because even whether she is in a relationship, a marriage, or in my case, unattached, at an event, for the majority of events, the female has the choice in comparison. That's something that's been a misunderstanding for some that have needed to think about that. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to go to my website, www.susanmeling.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com. It's my ornery PSA journal blog. There's my book section. You can click the links to go purchase the books through Amazon as for my profits, and then subscribe to my official YouTube channel, like my official YouTube videos, and if you're going to leave a comment, make sure to have etiquette and respect. Today is the 2nd of July, 2022. Some things to remember and keep in mind. 2nd of July, 2022. Re-listen to my official YouTube video if you need that clarification.